Good evening. This is David Unsworth, host of the Pan Am Post English podcast. This weekend, Poland celebrated its Independence Day on November 11th, commemorating the occasion with a massive march through the streets of Warsaw. But there is concern that the patriotic day has been hijacked by right-wing nationalist and even fascist groups incorporating anti-Semitic and anti-Islamic messages, as well as white nationalism. Is this a further sign of the rise of populism and nationalism in Europe, some of it which comes with accompanying bigotry and prejudice? How will the EU deal with this new challenge as it seeks to foster greater economic and political integration in Eastern Europe, where most countries still remain outside the eurozone? And why has Poland veered to the hard right as of late? In Poland, and I was there recently, a couple of months ago, a new party has taken power called the Law and Justice Party. They have a sizable majority in the Polish Senate, 64 out of 100 seats, and they have 235 out of 460 seats in the lower house, which is called the Sejm, making it by far the largest party in the country. And they also the Prime Minister Beata Szydło is also a member of that party. According to Al Jazeera, 100,000 people were expected to attend the rally, and organizers claimed that that number was surpassed. The theme of the rally was "We Want God," which takes its name from an old Polish nationalist song, and was actually quoted by Donald Trump on his recent visit to Poland. The Antifa Warsaw group held a counter-protest, and it's estimated that had around 5,000 participants. So the main takeaways from the rally, the main themes of the rally, were anti-EU and anti-Islamic sentiments. It was not necessarily officially an event sponsored by the Law and Justice Party, but it appears that many Law and Justice supporters were marching in the rally, and even people obviously on the farther to the right of the Law and Justice Party. The Law and Justice Party is kind of a center-right party that mixes traditional Catholicism, Euroscepticism, right-wing populism, and economic interventionism. And they also have a rather hard line on immigration issues, which has put them in the crosshairs of the EU. Poland has refused to take in refugees, or actually at one point they said that they would take in Christian refugees, but they would not take in Muslim refugees. White nationalist Richard Spencer from the United States was scheduled to attend, but he was removed from the schedule at the last minute. It appears that the government prohibited his entry into Poland, although this has not been confirmed. It's been reported in the media that some of the more extremist signs that were seen in the rally include clean blood, pray for an Islamic Holocaust, white Europe. So, what is the Polish nationalist movement like? What do they believe in? What do they fight for? What do they fight against? How are they related to Ukrainian or Russian or Serbian or other Eastern European nationalist movements? The situation with Poland, obviously you have to look at the historical context, and for more than a century, Poland was a people without a nation. Their territory was actually divided up by the Prussian Empire, the Russian Empire, the Prussian Empire being to the west, the Russian Empire being to the east, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire being to the south. So this date, November 11th, 2 days ago, commemorates the reconstitution of the Polish nation at the end of World War I, after 123 years of being partitioned between the three neighboring powers, the three neighboring empires of the time. So, and obviously, it's well known what happened to Poland during World War II, sandwiched between two global powers, Hitler's Nazis and Stalin's Soviet Union. In 1939, Hitler invaded Poland, absolutely crushed its army, and in 1943-44, Stalin starts pushing west through Poland and just massacres all around. So Polish nationalism is still very real to people, and there are still fresh wounds. In fact, recently there has been a renewed call on the part of Polish nationalists for wartime reparations from Germany. In my mind, rather counterproductive. I mean, it was 70 years ago. I think it's time to move on here, but this still is a viable political and social movement in Poland. And many of the movements that were participating in this nationalist march go back to the time of World War I and World War II, the National Radical Camp, the National Movement, and the All Polish Youth. And as it stands now, there are fault lines emerging between the Polish government and the EU in Brussels, particularly over the eurozone, the refugee problem, and terrorist attacks. So, when it comes to nationalism in Eastern Europe, the difference is palpable. And I think in some ways, nationalism in Eastern Europe is a good thing, and I think in other ways it is a bad thing. I certainly feel like in Eastern Europe they do not have this obsession with political correctness that seems to have swept so much of the West. And in that sense, I think it's good. In another sense, though, I think that the problem with nationalism and the problem with economic nationalism is that it actually ends up hurting countries more than it helps them. There's certainly nothing wrong with putting your own economic interests first. That is what a president or a prime minister or a government is elected to do. So I am not very... When people, for example, criticize Donald Trump and say that he's an economic nationalist, he's putting the interests of the United States first, well, that is what he's supposed to do. I mean, that's what he was elected to do. He wasn't elected to improve the economy of Mexico or Canada or China. He was elected to improve the economy of the United States. But the problem with right-wing populism or economic nationalism is that it often leads to interventionism in the economy. It would be one thing if this was a movement that was seeking economic freedom, but really what it appears is that this Law and Justice Party in Poland does not really have much interest in non-interventionism in the economy. Actually, they want to run the economy. They want a heavy-handed state intervention in the economy, which, in my mind, that doesn't exactly square with at least the definition of the right wing or the conservative movement in the United States. But this, you see what is happening in Poland, you see all across Eastern Europe, in most parts of Eastern Europe. And they are. It's strange because even though they suffered under the onerous yoke of communism for so long, for the better part of 3 generations, or between 2 and 3 generations, they and communism did not encourage religion, whether it was Protestant, Catholic, or Orthodox. They still see themselves as a religious nation, and they do not like the idea of Muslims moving into their country. And there are very few Muslims that have moved to Eastern Europe. Almost all of them have gone to Western Europe. And it seems that this trend is only going to continue throughout Eastern Europe, and the European Union has a real dilemma on its hands because they had a quota system in place that was supposed to be proportional, that was supposed to spread the burden, share the burden, if you will, and there really is no mechanism in place. There's little that the European Union can do to obligate members in Eastern Europe to take in refugees. And Germany obviously has borne the brunt of this, although clearly what Angela Merkel did was most likely ill-advised. I mean, she basically just opened up the gates. Most people, even people on the left, are suggesting that it was probably a foolish move, that she should have been much more cautious and much more pragmatic about it. But they were interviewing people at this rally, and they interviewed one guy who said, well, about 70% of us are just nationalists, but then there's maybe 30% of this rally that are fascists. So that is certainly a concern here. And with that fascism comes anti-Semitism and anti-Islamism, although there certainly is a case to be made that countries, democratic countries, should elect leaders who make the decisions based on immigration policy. And I certainly do believe that Poland does have a right to set its own immigration policy for itself. I don't think that the European Union should be able to say to the Czech Republic or Poland or Hungary or anyone else that they have to take in a certain number of refugees every year. That doesn't make any sense. Despite participating in the EU, these are sovereign nation states that should have the right to make their own decisions when it comes to immigration policy. And I think in some sense they'll be better off for that. I think in some sense they'll be worse off for that. There are certainly upsides and downsides to open borders and immigration policy. But what we're seeing with the rise of nationalism and right-wing movements is kind of a backlash against the culture of political correctness and the push for open borders that has seemed to be something that the elites in government, in academia, in the media have been advocating. And on that front, I certainly don't see anything wrong with what the Polish nationalist movement is doing. With regard to the religious aspects of it, Poland is one of the few countries in Europe that actually still has appreciation for traditional values and still is more of a religious nation than a secular nation. Catholicism is obviously very ingrained into the identity of Poland, particularly being sandwiched between Russia, which is historically an Orthodox country, and Germany, which is more than anything a Protestant country. Catholicism is certainly a big part of their national identity. And in fact, Beata Szydło, the current Prime Minister of Poland, who is part of the Law and Justice Party, recently said that she is, quote, in favor of an EU where Christian traditions are not censorship. So it seems to go to the heart. Obviously, the EU and the idea of the EU is to promote secularism, which is something that has taken root in Britain, France, and Germany, and Italy, but it appears to have not taken root in Poland in the same way, or in Eastern Europe in the same way. So, ultimately, Poland is going to stay in the European Union, and so is Hungary, which also has a right-wing party called Jobbik that is also very anti-immigration. They're not going anywhere. They are not going to leave the European Union, but they also are probably likely to really drag their feet on integration into the eurozone. They use their own currencies, obviously, and there really is no good solution. The EU doesn't want to alienate these right-wing governments in Eastern Europe by really cracking down on them on things like the refugee issue and immigration. But there's no good way to force them to do something, particularly when Poland now does not have the same political climate as the UK or Germany or France. It's very different. It is more traditional, it is more Eurosceptic, and it is more populist and right-wing, for better or worse. This has been David Unsworth with the Pan Am Post English podcast. Thanks for listening, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel.